including the next panel discussion, which is titled How HR Leaders Can Use Data and Insights to Influence the C-Suite. Corporate leaders welcome news they can use, which means HR executives have an opportunity to guide their colleagues with fresh insights about their workforce, whether it's using AI to measure employee skills or platforms to connect with worker sentiment. Technology puts new tools in the hand of HR leaders. So we'll be exploring what are the potential benefits as well as some obstacles. Who should be your corporate allies in taking these new initiatives? How can you choose among the many new technologies available? And what are the best methods for sharing what you learned with the C-Suite? Our moderator for this session, welcome back, is Emily McCrary Ruiz Esparza, a freelance journalist and From Day One contributing editor. Emily, over to you.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much. And welcome to all of our panelists. I know they're beginning to log on right now. Hi, Rebecca, Josh, Courtney. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to everybody. Before we get started, I wanted to just point out one statistic that I found while preparing for this panel today. And it's that it's an Oracle survey from 2021, and it found that, among many other interesting things, that less than 30% of HR professionals say they're good or very good at making positive changes based on people analytics. Yet, of course, HR is now a part of the C-suite in a lot of organizations. And in most, it officially has the attention of the C-suite and the boardroom. So I know our panelists will be able to give us great ideas about how to be more influential in business decisions. So before we get to our questions for today, I'd like to have each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. We'll begin with Rebecca from Eightfold.
Hey there. Hope everyone's having a great day. Rebecca Warren. I run a customer success team here at Eightfold. Previous background in talent acquisition for more years than I'm going to share, all the way from sourcer up to senior leader in several large CPG, restaurant, and retail organizations. So super excited to be here to talk about HR and all the fun ways to engage with the C-suite.
Thanks, Rebecca. Welcome. Courtney.
Good afternoon, everyone. Courtney White. I'm the head of human resources for North America and also global diversity, equity, and inclusion at BASF Agricultural Solutions. Maybe like Rebecca, I've been in HR for probably more time than I'll say right now because I like to think everyone sees me as youthful. However, at the same time, I've also spent time in business development, sales, communications, and a number of other areas. In about 7 different industries. So as someone's looking at me, I hope that youth thing is kicking in right now. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.
I'm buying it, Courtney. I'm buying
it. Josh.
Hey, everybody. My name's Josh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Confirm. We're a performance review platform that's built on the science of organizational network analysis to reveal who is really driving impact in your organization and who needs help. Prior to Confirm, I spent 6 years at a company called Carta, where I was the chief product officer, experiencing all the pain of performance reviews as both a contributor and a people leader.
Thanks, Josh. Isabel?
Hi, lovely to meet you all. I'm Isabel Lincoln. I head up HR for Unibail Rodamco Westfield. So we own shopping malls in major US cities, along with some airport concessions and some major airports as well. So my background is actually in entertainment and tech. So a lot of experience with learning on the fly, kind of, managing high emotions and data at the same time. And I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Westfield is one of my very favorite malls in San Diego.
Oh, it's a beautiful one. I'm thrilled to hear it.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to all of you. Let's get started. I want to know, does HR have to have an official seat in the C-suite? So do they need to have a CHRO in order to be influential in business decisions? And if they don't have a CHO or a CPO seat, how do you build credibility in legitimizing yourself and needing to contribute to business decisions? Courtney, would you get us started here?
Happy to do it. Now, admittedly, I will say one of the things all professionals know is you have to know yourself. And so I know where my biases are, Emily. And so when you ask the question, does HR have to have a seat at the table? My bias is absolutely yes. Now, when you, now there are two parts to the question though, right? The second part is around influence. And here's what I know, it's ideal if it's already set up that way, but at the same time, if HR is not in the C-suite, it doesn't give us an opportunity or a rationale as to why the job or the role that we need to play isn't the same. What shifts is the how we go about it, how we manage it and do it. And so with that, you know, kind of being the case, here's what we know, or I think the goal of being in the room is to make sure that there's shared responsibility to co-create and really influence and shape business strategy. And I think what most people also tell you is that, you know, knowing and understanding talent is the key differentiator to how that business strategy is going to move forward. Access to talent, developing, retaining. And if that's the biggest differentiator to sustainability and longevity of an organization, it will lead to a different question, and which is how can, you know, we effectively co-create strategy, influence strategy if we aren't in the room when the strategy is being built and met, et cetera, in order to share that unique perspective. Because it's, at the end of the day, it's all about impact. And I have a motto that I live by, which says, if your presence doesn't make an impact, your absence won't make a difference. And so when in the room, in the seat, to your point, we have to do it. And if you'll permit me one last quick thing here, I don't mean to be political when I state this, but Joe Biden says in one of his famous quotes, don't show me what you believe in, you know, show me your budget, and then I'll tell you what you believe in. And so if I just, you know, shift that a little bit, here's what I would say. Don't tell me you believe in people talent as being the biggest differentiator. You know, show me who's in the room when specific decisions are being made, then I'll tell you if you really see that talent is the biggest differentiator.
Rebecca, I saw you nodding your head through a lot of that. What do you particularly agree with? What were you getting excited about when Courtney was talking?
Well, I think if we simplify that down, right, it's put your money where your mouth is, right? If you're going to talk about it, then you've actually got to back it up. And so I think the seat at the table is about solving problems. And so if you can bring a solution instead of complaining about things or just talking into the air. Courtney, I love what you say about if your presence doesn't matter, your absence won't matter either, right? So if every time we have the ear of someone in leadership that we're able to share a solution that we want to provide, a problem that we're looking to solve, a way that we want to partner, I think there's a lot more excitement around bringing HR to the table because we're continually thinking about how do we make that organization better? How do we make our people better?
Isabel, I'm coming to you next on this one.
Yeah.
I want to know what skills an HR department needs in order to consistently advise on data-driven decisions. What are the signs that maybe you need a person dedicated to this, like a people analytics position, or can this responsibility be shared across an HR department without a specific quant on the team?
It's a really good question because I think first and foremost, you have to think about the size of the organization and how you want to leverage the data. So whether you have budget for, you know, that person who handles HR analysis, or you have to kind of all do it collectively, I think it's really important to leverage the data that you are collecting now. So any HR process that you're running, you know, talent reviews at the end of the year, like that gives you a huge quantity of quantitative and qualitative information about the quality of your talent that you have in an organization. Are you leveraging something like that to the very best of its ability? You're helping to identify top talent. You're taking a look at it through the lens of DE&I. You're making sure that the skill sets of your people are aligned with business needs. And so I think that if you are to leverage that for everything that it's worth, you'll get the most out of it, whether you have a dedicated process or not, dedicated person or not to do HR analysis. The other thing is you have to know how to tell the story with the data. So no C-suite is going to change or move or give you money to invest in something if you can't tell the compelling story with data. So you have to manage and balance that data with an emotional appeal for what you're doing with it. Is it tied to a specific action, like Courtney and Rebecca were saying, where you have a strong seat at the table and you can demonstrate your impact on helping the business to move forward and get its goals? And I think that it also matters the type of business you have and the industry you're in. If you're in, say, like aerospace, you're going to be living and breathing data all day. So that's probably a more persuasive way to make some of your cases for asking for things of your leadership, and or being able to tell the story of how the company is doing from a people perspective in a way, in a language that they really understand. I come from entertainment, where it was sort of relationship first, data were depending on how you wanted to look at it. And with that, again, you can kind of help to craft a more rigorous way of looking at people and help to educate your C-suite on why this matters beyond just sort of their emotional response to sort of, the current state of their talent.
You mentioned coming from entertainment, where it was relationship versus data, maybe if it
Sometimes, yeah.
I'm interested, I'd like to know then, because you've worked in two different environments in that way, what do you find to be more persuasive? Is the emotional appeal of relationships really, really compelling to people?
You need both. I love the point that Rebecca made around you're coming to the table and solving problems. So are there sort of strategic things that you can do from an HR perspective that help leaders to accomplish what they need for the business, which also accomplishes what you need to accomplish? And I think it's a balance of really understanding what they need. What are that leader's natural strengths? Where are areas that you can supplement them? How is that leader and that leader's organization interfacing with other verticals across the business? In HR, we're not business owners, but I feel like we're business brokers. And we're the one department or division that really interacts with everybody of a whole company, no matter what industry, company size, or location you're in. And so I think really leveraging that spot in the organization and that influence is really powerful. So I would really say probably both, but I do think that you need to personalize your value to each leader to some extent by, at minimum, really understanding what their priorities are and how you can help them solve problems, to Rebecca's great point.
I want to jump in here if that's okay. And I don't mean to be too controversial here, but Isabel, you used one of my trigger phrases, which is top talent, because it's so important to know exactly who that is. And I will make the case that we actually have pretty lousy tools to actually understand who top talent is. The most commonly employed tool is the manager rating. And, when you run a performance review, you get that bell curve of manager ratings. Almost nobody gets a 1, very few people get a 5. You get mostly 3s and 4s, right? That's a problem. The most important thing I think that HR can bring to leadership is to answer that question, who is my top talent? And I think this is where we have to get really creative, because the manager ratings won't get us there. Number one is there's 60% bias, right? We know that most of the rating is actually the manager's idiosyncrasies. And the second is, manager ratings are 100 years old. They were invented in the 1920s, before telephones, right, before the internet, before all the tools that we use. And the way that we work today is completely different. Right? We work in networks. We have Slack and Teams and Zoom, and we're more collaborative and cross-functional than ever. And managers just don't have the visibility anymore to make good talent assessments. We talk a lot about like quiet quitting, but we don't talk about kind of the quiet contributors, right? Those people who are making a big impact behind the scenes, and they may not be the ones who speak up in meetings. And we just don't have great tools to capture those contributions.
If you don't mind, I actually fully agree with you. So we have a much more holistic way of identifying who our top talent is than just manager ratings. And some of it is quantitative with Peer 360s. A lot of it is actually boots on the ground. Like, what are they accomplishing? Do they have transferable skill sets to other parts of the organization? What are we doing with succession planning? What's their individual development plan? I really agree with you. Like, there's a lot that needs to go into that beyond just the opinion of one manager to determine someone's whole career. So just wanted to thank you for that.
maybe joining with both colleagues and, similar to what Isabel was saying and where Josh was going, I think, even back to this idea of how HR wins through data, et cetera, it comes back to having multiple perspectives that lead you to a conclusion, right? I mean, we are always looking for more and more information. For the HR function, we are fighting some myths from my perspective, right? Some ideas that folks who are in the HR profession think only people, but don't balance that with business. And so we've got to balance some of the emotional intelligence with also business intelligence too, because for most HR organizations, they're non-revenue generating. And so there's already a question mark as to, okay, you're a cost. And so how do we make sure that what we're doing through data in the storytelling, et cetera, is showing that we're an investment, because we do expect there to be a return in the organization as we go for top talent, as we're going for, quite honestly, any programming benefit or anything we offer, here's what we get out of it. And there are a number of ways to do that.
Would you care to share one or two of the ways?
So, I think so. If I think about my own team and organization and HR strategy, we always try to balance three lenses, right? What are we doing for the workforce? What are we doing in the workplace? And then what are we doing in the marketplace? And we need to have, demonstrable ways of sharing that. For example, I think it was even said by the person who was on right before this panel talking about, the goal is to, drive engagement up, drive costs down. And at the end of the day, that really is, quite a bit about what the expectation is for the HR function. And so for everything that we do in the organization, I show what that correlation is. But some of the storytelling is about the time that I show the correlation. For example, when, I'm sorry, I have to put the big C word out there that nobody wants to hear, COVID. But when we were going through COVID, one of the biggest things everybody was worried about is, oh my gosh, we won't be able to have courses for development anymore. People won't be able to get together in person and do this, et cetera. So we went out, found some vendors who could help us deliver things virtually, just to let everybody know that it will continue. One of the things I didn't do in that moment, though, is share what the cost of that virtual training was. But I put a survey on it that basically asked people the question, if this was in person, would it be have been as impactful? How did you enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Long story short, at the end of the day, people agreed, just as impactful, enjoyed it. Actually got to see more people than I normally see based on the fact that we didn't have to travel in, we didn't have to do other things. That course was produced, and it's the same exact course that people would have taken in person, at a 65% cost savings to the organization. And that's before we even get to travel costs and other things. And so I can show that we can deliver the same quality in a differentiated way, also drive costs down. I can tell you this, the next time I put a proposal out, nobody questioned it. And so we have to continue to build credibility in different ways. And while we can do it with that, we may not be able to do it with some other things, but it's a trade-off and it's a balance. And so what we want to do is more credibility, more equity, and that then raises our voice and presence in the organization. I'll stop there because I'm sure other colleagues have other examples.
No, that's really helpful, Courtney. Thank you. You mentioned building credibility in different ways. Rebecca, I hope you could talk about how HR can educate the C-suite on new tools, new methodologies, new way to, prove the business value of different programs and policies. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. And I've just been loving all of the comments because I'm just shaking my head just frantically with everyone else. So very aligned with all of the things that are being said. I think when it comes to tools, right, I think are all very aware that HR has been a little bit behind the scenes when it, or behind the eight ball, I should say, when it comes to tech, maybe not as focused on that. What Isabel said, a little bit more about the emotion and about the events and about some of the softer side of HR. But I think as we continue to see data becoming that prevalent storyteller, we have to figure out how to use that to tell our stories. When I think about, Courtney, what you talked about, HR and a subset of that TA being a cost center as opposed to a value add, at least that's the perception. I think when it comes to those tools, we can't just show up at the table and say, I want to spend $500,000 on this tool because it's going to do X, right? We don't have anything to show. We don't have a story. We're not solving a problem. You can tell I have a theme. Like I always want to solve problems, right? So if you think about bringing that into the C-suite, we talk to the folks in the business. What are the problems that they're seeing? What are they finding is slowing them down? Like if we think about a simple example with talent acquisition and the hiring manager is saying, I'm not getting people fast enough. And we in TA say, well, that's because we can't get on your schedule because you're booked out 3 weeks and we do all this back and forth and blah, 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 right? So if we say, hey, we can get a scheduling tool that's going to come in, it's going to automate your scheduling. It's going to give the candidate a list of all the different open spots. It's going to show up on your calendar. We're going to be done. And we can, let's just say we can shave off 5 days out of that interview process or even 3, right? The cost of that, if we do the math, right, partner with the finance team and say the cost of this is going to cost us 20 cents per candidate if we hire X number at the end of the year, right? If you know your data, and then you can say this tool is going to save us not only efficiency, time, headache, but it's also going to get us talent faster. It becomes that no-brainer. It's like we are value add because we've done the research, we've talked to people, and this is what we're trying to do to solve a problem inside the organization. So if we just say, hey, we want to buy tech because it's cool, not compelling. But if we say, hey, here's what we're going to do with it, and not just today, right? Hey, we're going to do this automated scheduling thing today, but then next year we've got an add-on because we already have this company. We're going to be able then to, help our interview process itself. They're going to help us, write job descriptions or whatever, right? There's different ways that you can get your foot in the door, but I think it all has to come from a place of we're going to add value to the organization and not just our team. To me, it has to be broader than just what's happening inside of TA or HR. It's got to be something that's going to affect inside the organization. And then also there's that visibility to the marketplace as well. Courtney, I loved what you said about that 3 lenses, right? What do our customers think if we don't have this technology? What are we providing to them, right? We talk about the customer experience is never going to exceed the employee experience. So if we're not taking care of ourselves internally, how are we going to be able to take care of our customers? And I could say like 17 other things, but I'm going to stop now.
Solving problems, of course, is a great way to approach it. One problem that leaders are very concerned with at the moment is, are there the appropriate skills in the workforce, especially tech skills? They're changing really quickly. Employers need to make sure that they have the right skills in their workforce, either by training them internally or bringing new folks from the outside. So Josh, I'd like to hear from you when taking stock of the skills that are present in a given workforce. Can we rely on self-identified skills? You mentioned that performance reviews have, the way we've done in the past haven't always been the most effective ways. Could you talk about how one can take stock of that in a way that is really meaningful to executives?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me pull this apart. So performance reviews and skills. So on the performance review side, I'll say something a little controversial, that if you're doing performance reviews with manager ratings, you don't know who your top performers are. They're wrong for 2 reasons. And the first is, of course, bias. 60% of a manager's review is bias. And the second is that the way we work is so different from the way we actually measure and evaluate that work. We miss all those quiet contributors, for example. So now let's talk about skills. So people are notoriously bad assessors of their own skills. It's well-researched. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So if people are bad assessors of their own skills, and 60% of manager ratings are biased, what do we do? And this is where I think the answer to both of those problems is the methodology of organizational network analysis. So if you were to use ONA, right, you would answer some questions in a performance review like, who do you go to for help and advice? Or who do you see making an outstanding impact? And what comes out of that is not that bell curve that you would get of manager ratings. What you typically get is actually a power law. So what you see is that there are 10 to 15% of the people in the organization who are creating 50 to 60% of the impact. And leadership has a pretty intuitive sense that that's true, because out of every 8 to 10 people that they manage, my guess is that there are 1 or 2 of them who are so amazing that they, you just wish you could clone them. Like, that's the power law of talent. That's what happens when people work collaboratively in networks. But the other thing that comes out of it are your experts, right? So if we were to ask that question, right, who do you go to for help and advice? We could very quickly see, for example, that 12 people go to Emily for help with copywriting. And now we know we have an expert in copywriting. And it didn't require Emily to tell us, and it didn't require Emily's manager to tell us either, right? So the power of sample size actually reveals that. And like impact, expertise also follows this power law, where you have a small percentage of the organization that's helping everybody else. And we better know who those people are if we're going to make good talent decisions.
I'm going to tack on to that too, Josh. I think that those are great points. I think also if we take it back a step further and we look at our job descriptions, right? If we look at what the role is actually supposed to do, and we have managers assess skills that are required for the position as opposed to a person's skills. What does this position require? It also then allows a more neutral connection between here are the skills we need today for this job, but then it also allows you to say, hey, we see, if you're talking to your organizational leaders, if you say we see that we're going to want to be there in 5 years, what skills are we going to need then? And then you can do that talent review of saying, objectively, here's what this role needs. And then you have those conversations, Josh, what you're talking about. I love that. To pair that up to say, this is objectively what we need and where we're going to go. And then how do you work to upskill, reskill, get folks into a spot? Maybe they're in a job that they don't love, but you can see that they have some transferable skills that you can put them into something that is more compelling. Maybe you've got somebody who is quiet in their role because they don't love it, but they need the paycheck. But if then you can say, hey, they've got these skills and we're going to put them in this job. You may find that you've got a whole different employee on your hands. So I think also objectively evaluating what skills are needed for what roles and then tying those pieces together makes it less subjective and a little bit more objective.
I love your point, Rebecca. I would love to build on it with a real life example. So we have been doing that. There's been a ton of change in our organization for several years. And so we had a lot of needed skill sets. And what we chose was to really, again, focus on the business need and the job description of what we're really looking at, and then actually look very creatively at our own internal talent and move people entire functions as much as really made sense for the business. And so at this point, over 11% of my entire US workforce has switched functions entirely. So not like accounting to finance, it's like finance to IT, or like marketing to sales, or legal to people, like really, really creative things. So not only do I agree with what you said, I think that the holistic way of looking at it, you have better retention, you have better partnership across the business. Like it's really a win all the way around in a tough labor market. So.
Yeah, what a great way of retaining workers. Josh, you want to jump in?
I want to add a little bit of nuance because I actually don't think it's just about skills. So I made the point that 60% of a manager's rating is biased, the Dunning-Kruger effect, people are very bad at assessing their own skills. But the reality is it's not work today. It's not about what you know. It's about what you share about what you know. So it's not enough to be an expert in something or to have a skill. What matters is that I'm actually sought out for that skill. I'm actually helpful. I'm actually applying it and using it for the benefit of the people around me. Work today is a team sport. There's almost nothing that we do that we do in isolation. Right? Everything takes a team. And so it's not really, just to add some nuance, it's not really about the skill. It's about how does this person actually use that skill to benefit the people around them? And that's really what we ought to be measuring.
Yeah, and it's also digging in to find out maybe they're not using that skill, but they would like to. So you're right. It's what people see, but then it's also how do you get to that next level of what they really want to do, right? I saw something recently that said my resume is a list of all the things I never want to do again. So we want to make sure that we're not just pigeonholing folks by what they do, but there may be something else that they want to do. So how do you get to that next layer and really understand what Isabel is saying, like how do we get them to that next position? I love this.
To your point, maybe just one additional build, and maybe it's even a little bit of a hybrid. A few years back, we transitioned our hiring strategy to one that we call impact-based hiring. And the intent behind impact-based hiring is to look at, what demonstrably is happening with an individual. What have they done in their career in our organization, or if we're looking at attracting people from the external environment, that basically then, kind of leans on the philosophy that, past success is an indicator of future success. It doesn't have to be in that specific function, because if we lead ourselves, back to the idea of, true diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's bigger, right, than a number of things. It's ideas, it's experiences, et cetera. And how do we harness what we really need to come together? So impact-based hiring has made a huge difference from us divorcing ourselves from the traditional idea of what we thought was required based on the last person in the role to what it can be based on the future.
I really love that concept. And I think one of the ways that we haven't done that, so I want to learn more about it, but is to really empower hiring managers and people managers in general, and try to help them to think more holistically around what they need on their team and what could be most impactful. Because I do think that sort of like, let's hire the same person I had before, just get the butt in the seat and get them working, is like the easy default that people have without that kind of elevated perspective.
Well, sorry to say this really quickly, Emily, but to your point, Isabel, and then when we go out into the market or in the organization and try to find it, well, they say, well, it's so hard, it doesn't exist. That's because there was only the one person just doing the job that moved on. And so that's why we can't find it. So maybe we have to do it differently.
Yeah.
I want to bring us back to influencing the C-suite, as great as that conversation was, because you all are so knowledgeable about both. This has been a great diversion. Okay, so where do you think the HR discipline has is really good at influencing the C-suite? What skills do they have? I mean, Isabel, you talked earlier, maybe there's relationship, there's data. Where do you think HR is really good at exerting influence, and where do you think the discipline as a whole really has room for improvement? Because, the large influence of HR over an enterprise is newer. It really has not been this influential before. So where do you think the discipline has room to grow, Isabel?
So I think the importance of really understanding not just the business plan for the next few months, but really like the business vision, I think is something that would be an evolution I'd love to see for all of us. I think part of that is having the bandwidth to do it. I think it's very easy as an HR organization to get stuck in all the compelling day-to-day. And so one thing that my team and I are trying to do is to build in time to connect to the really bigger picture business strategy and vision of where you want it to go. So an example that I can share with you is like, if I'm working with my sales division, they know their sales targets. Like, I don't need to know it at the depth that they do. But again, I described us as being a bit of a business broker. So as HR, can I take a strategic step back and look at, all right, they're meeting their sales targets or they're working towards those. But what about the entire execution process of, signing the lease? Because that's cross-functional. How are we looking at the different business processes? A lot of times leaders are focused on the goals for just their division. And so for HR, you can provide that opportunity to take a step back and look at things holistically and kind of connect across different functions. So that's something that my team and I have spent a lot of time doing. I think as well, there's an opportunity for HR to continue to educate the C-suite on really important HR decisions, data, processes. So the example I would share around that is, healthcare is a massive cost driver for all of us. We're always a little bit sweating bullets in the summer to see what your renewal rates are going to be. And I historically haven't found the C-suite to be really emotionally engaged with like, how can you evolve the benefits? Like, don't look at it as just like a factor of inflation, but like, how can you think differently and really be invested in what it means on the ground for employees there. So I think that there's an education piece that HR can do as well. And then there's also been a lot of articles that I've read, and we've experienced this as well, in terms of the really important role that HR plays in terms of building trust and authenticity as it relates to communications and kind of the conduit of cascading information between the C-suite and employees. And so I think for that, like, you can't randomly say that like, okay, the CFO is going to be the person responsible for it, but like who's best positioned to really look at the way that the C-suite is interacting with the full organization and how they're influencing and inspiring and making decisions and bringing employees along with the process of how that decision is made. So I don't know that I answered your question in terms of like what we do well, what we don't do well, but I think for me, those are some of the priorities or things that we've been working towards on our end.
Courtney, where would you say the HR field is not yet seen as subject matter expert?
I think it's kind of what's been a bit of the spirit of the conversation quite a bit. I think CEOs intuitively know that you need to have somebody in the room who is focused on people, right? It just makes, it's logical. At the same time, there still has to be an appreciation for that intelligence in the room too. And so I think it's a little bit of both the person in the HR role starting to understand more of the business discussion and what's going on to paint the vision as was just stated. And at the same time, starting to shift some of the common understanding of language in the room by others. This role really is about helping keep the organization, I think, grounded to the culture as well. There's sometimes unintentionally what happens is, you're the CEO of the organization, but you think you know what's going on, but do you really know? Are you still as relevant as you were when you were working on the shop floor or when you were in the field, et cetera? And people tell you what they want you to hear versus what may be the reality. And so here is the trusted advisor that's saying, this is what you think is going on, but actually here's how we balance that. Quickly, there was a Gartner, I was reading some Gartner information here recently, and it said 70% of CEOs say they know that HR is a key differentiator, but only 55% actually feel as though HR is meeting that expectation. And for those that report to CFOs, only 30% feel as though HR is meeting that expectation. So back to your point, people know it makes sense, but there's a gap, and that gap potentially could be some of what was discussed earlier, and that is just because you're in HR doesn't mean your whole life had to be in HR. If your whole life has been in HR, how do you then diversify yourself to earn the credibility that says, yes, I understand people, but I also know what a day in the life is like in some other areas, which helps people also want to listen and embrace your voice. And it also authenticates a lot of what you're saying from my perspective. So that authentication is a process I would suggest we still have some room to grow in.
You mentioned, Courtney, that, a lot of CEOs realize we need a person in the room who's concerned with people. I'm wondering, Josh, C-suite might think even if they think that's valuable to have that person in the room, they might think, okay, you've brought me information about the skills that we have, retention, attrition, that kind of thing. But the C-suite may still think those are personnel matters only, and therefore within the purview of HR, and other business functions are not to be bothered with that. So what data does the C-suite need to see in order to know what changes to make within each organization and to know that that information matters for all business functions?
Yeah, and kind of building on that gap between HR and the CEO, it's important to understand that the CEO is responsible to the board and responsible to the shareholders. And I think that a lot of the gap between HR and the CEO or the C-suite in general comes from the story that we tell is not the experience that they're living. And I'll just take the talent perspective on this. A lot of C-suite leaders I know that I work with have this inherent belief that there are a few people in the company that if they left, everything would fall apart. And then there's probably a certain percentage of the company, it's probably a single-digit percentage, that if those employees walked out the door tomorrow, nobody would know the difference. And you know what? They're right on both counts. But that's not the story that we tell, especially when we talk about talent management. When we do performance reviews, for example, we come in saying that, most of the company is average, it's meeting expectations. And until we start telling a story that matches that ground truth experience, we're going to have an uphill battle. I think that the biggest, if you remember anything from anything I've said today, it's that I think the biggest secret that HR has yet to learn and to embrace is that talent doesn't follow a bell curve. It follows a power law. It's that 10 to 15% of employees who are driving the impact. And manager ratings won't tell you who they are, but if you use a tool like organizational network analysis, you can suss them out. But if you can tell the C-suite, if you can communicate who those people are who are driving impact, and in many cases who isn't, I promise leadership will be engaged in that.
How else could that work when presenting information to the C-suite? So HR is increasingly becoming a function that comes with ideas, that comes with, hey, here is a problem, we can solve it. I've identified something, especially if you're thinking about people analytics. Hey, we've identified something, we need to do something about it. Isabel, if the HR team is going in and saying this, how do they prevent becoming strapped with all the responsibilities of implementing all of those things? So like, all right, you identified the problem, you guys
go solve it. Yeah. It's a really good question. And I think there are three things that come to mind. And again, it's leveraging the resources that you already have. So one thing that I mentioned before that I think is really important is in order to execute any kind of big process or project, the communication around the change management is huge. And one thing that we learned the hard way a couple of times is how important it is to really partner with leadership to make sure that that message is being cascaded. So whether it's a call to action to work in a different way, whether you're trying to establish a cross-functional project team, that's something that HR can help broker around the cross-functional project team to solve the problem. You look at it as a career development opportunity for employees. You can give them small project bonuses. You can have them present the results to like the whole company or to key stakeholders, which costs nothing, to try to really leverage talent that wants to take on some meaty challenges and get new experience and build new relationships and have strong impact. So those two things. And then I think the third thing would be really empowering people that can influence the success of this project or who would be catalysts for change in how to do that. So it could be, for me, a place that I always look is the people managers. There's so much that they can do around building the culture, changing the way that people work day to day, helping to change mindsets from reactive to strategic. Now, that's easy to do, but they're a key component of that. So in that way, can you have them be allies and partners in doing this work or doing this project or embracing this change so that it isn't just like an HR thing. It feels more organic and people are brought along that change in some way, project or not, for them to do. So those I think would be three things that would come to mind to sort of get some additional help, that it wouldn't just be on an HR team.
Mm-hmm.
If I could build just quickly, Emily, it's interesting too, because I always love to do this when I go out to different groups. I always ask, what does HR do? And people always come back with the same response, hire. And I go, oh, okay, HR hires. And then what else does HR do? And then it pauses and it gets weird. I say, it's okay, somebody can say it. Then they say fire. So HR hires and fires. And so then I ask, now, who in this room was hired by HR? It could happen, but who was hired by HR? And then they pause. Now, typically, you were hired by a manager, right? And we call that person a hiring manager. And while you may not want to believe it, they also perhaps become a firing manager if the situation comes up. And so if that's not HR's role, if HR is not hiring and firing, what are they doing? It always goes quiet. And so there is something inherent in what we have to teach and educate, whereas we're facilitators of what's going on. And why do I raise that? Because back to your point about how do we not take everything on, I'm also notorious for saying, if it's all dependent upon me or the one person you have in your HR business or any one person, you might as well give up today. Because we all have to be here together. This is why co-creation is so important, because it takes all of us to get this done. Everybody in the organization is a member of HR. It's how they have to, rethink their mindset around it. And that's how we have to replicate it and make sure that it's not on one person's shoulders. And that's not just for HR, that's for any function in any group in the organization.
Rebecca, what would you add to this?
Yeah, I think HR tends to have and we can call it all kinds of different things, right? Like we can call it the people team, whatever we call it. I think there is a a responsibility to be visible inside the organization, not just as the terminator or, oh no, HR is coming, or I'm going to tell HR, right? We have that reputation. We need to become that trusted advisor. When we show up, we want people to say, yay, they're here because they're going to listen and they're a partner with me. I think a lot of the things that can get done are done by relationships, right? And folks that are in HR are there for the relationships, whether it's external, internal, employees, C-suite, whatever. So I think the more visibility that HR has inside the organization that comes alongside as a partner, the more you know, and everybody has said this, the more you know about your business, the better off you're going to be. What is this department working on? What are they trying to solve for? What's happening? I think you also have to be really aware of what's happening outside the walls. We can get really insulated and spend a lot of time inside our bubble, but we have to get uncomfortable and we have to learn about things that maybe we don't want to learn about. And we've got to pay attention to things that are happening. And then it's bringing those insights, that data, that information back inside the walls, right? Like you think about the affirmative action ruling that happened where we said, you know, campuses are not able to bring folks in based on color or gender. What does that do to your organization? If we say we know that and we take that piece of information and we put it in an email and we forward it on up, that's one thing. But if we say, hey, here's what we may want to think about, you may want to look at your early career hiring, because if that's where we're getting the most of our diversity in the organization, we've got a problem, right? So it's bringing that insight and that additional perspective on what's happening outside the doors, coming inside the doors, and building those relationships, networking inside and outside the organization to show that continual value. I'm not sure that answered your question at all, but that was just something that was on my mind.
Well, thank you to all of you, Rebecca, Courtney, Josh, and Isabel. This has been a really lovely conversation. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to turn it back over to Steve at From Day One.